Phoena's Quest, Book 1, First Spark, by Chrissy Garwood. Chapter 15. 3 Champions. "My lords," Phoena cried, "please don't kneel before me. I'm only a servant." She reached out towards each of them, trying to persuade them to rise. She was careful not to be too familiar, not daring to touch them. "Carillion, you mustn't. Barapa, surely you are the sensible one. Oramus, please." A shadow fell over the tableau. Phoena flinched. Lord Westonbrook and Matron were standing a few paces away. It took but a moment for Phoena to drag herself upright. This was more than enough time to regret parting with her overdress. In slow motion, the jacket Barapa had draped over her body drifted to the ground. The damp petticoat clung to her slender figure. A stiff breeze blew along the riverbank. Her body shivered as she considered retrieving the jacket. Immediately this idea dissipated, replaced by a new awareness. This throbbing pain in her head warned against any sudden moves. That pain behind her eyes flashed in rhythm with a tingling in her fingers and toes. The temptation to drop back into nothingness grew. If she had been alone, she might have yielded to the darkness at the edge of her mind. Phoena refocused on the young noblemen who had knelt before her. They did not share her immobility. Instead, they moved in unison. With a shout, they leapt to their feet as a team. They turned their backs to her and drew their swords. The air resounded with the song of tensile steel in the hands of enthusiastic youth. "So that's how it will be," Lord Westonbrook said. His massive arm began to rise. "No!" screamed Phoena. Without thought, the maid raised her hands in the air. The 3 would-be defenders flew over her head. 3 swords clattered onto the grass in front of her. She stared. How had she moved them? The ground shook as they landed behind her. Their outraged complaints revealed more about how far she had thrown them. Her pain intensified as if she had exhausted what strength remained. But there was no time to reflect on her actions. Already the young noblemen had scrambled to their feet. Their swords were not their only weapons. They loudly declared their intentions. This was not the time to be timid. She lurched forward to meet Lord Westonbrook. "You must not harm them." "You dare to challenge me?" With her eyes fixed on his angry face, Phoena became a statue. Was that what she was doing? Challenging his authority? How did she come to this ridiculous situation? A half-drowned orphan girl giving orders to one of the senior nobility. And yet his hand stilled. Lord Westonbrook stood far enough away that she did not fear violence from his hands. But now his eyes took in her appearance. Phoena glanced down. The blood drained from her face. A water-soaked petticoat was a most unsatisfactory covering. She shuffled her bare feet. At that moment, as if it were her only concern, stinging pain on her arm demanded her full attention. What was the stickiness where her fingers pressed against her goose-bumped skin? An answer came. This must be where the fishhook had wounded her. Matron took a step closer. She removed her white shawl and held it towards Phoena. The shivering girl reached for it. Matron dropped it into her hands. The maid wrapped herself in the still warm garment. Matron peered into Phoena's eyes for a moment and nodded. The older woman returned to her position beside Lord Westonbrook. As Matron withdrew, Carillion appeared at Phoena's left side. Oramus stood by her right. Their hands retrieved their unsheathed swords. She glanced at them. They were far enough from her that they could wield their weapons without striking her. Lord Westonbrook's frown darkened. "Your pardon, my lady," Barapa whispered in her ear. His hand appeared on her shoulder. She gasped. Could he sense the heat that his touch had awoken within her? It felt as if her shoulder was on fire. He stiffened. "Please forgive this liberty, but we can't risk you disappearing alone." His fingers trembled. Phoena reached up and touched his hand. A blast of white-hot pain exploded in her chest. She jerked her hand, but with a twist of his wrist he held her fingers captive against her shoulder. They stared at each other. The concern on Barapa's face deepened. He shuffled closer. Ahem! Lord Westonbrook sounded even more annoyed. Matron put her hand on Lord Westonbrook's arm and shook her head. "We agreed," Matron said to him, "that this time we would do things my way. You can't help yourself, but when you play headmaster with the child, you frighten her too much." "I frighten her?" he roared. "I'm sure I've aged 100 years since she first disappeared. And you're doing nothing to improve the situation by shouting." Matron continued as if she was lecturing one of the footmen. "When I agreed to come to the academy," Matron said, "you withheld your intentions. It was ill-advised to cut yourself completely from her life. A lot has happened in 13 years. She is not one of your troublesome boys." "I suppose you're right, Cecily." Lord Westonbrook rubbed his forehead. A sheepish smile appeared on his face. "You usually are. I'll leave the talking to you." Phoena stared. She had never heard anyone address Matron by any other name, and Matron Cecily spoke to the intimidating man as if she were his equal. There was a special bond here that spoke of a deeper mystery. This intimidating woman had always been difficult to please. Matron had always lurked in the background, stepping forward to deliver a reprimand. Now Phoena re-evaluated her presence in significant situations. 1,000 questions sprang into the maid's mind. She wrestled them into silence. The effort made Phoena stagger. Barapa slipped his other arm around her waist. His body pressed against her. She offered a half-smile. Lord Westonbrook spoke again. "Cecily, please tell that young man to remove his hands from my goddaughter, and make those fools put away their swords." His words only heightened the tension. Phoena prayed that the young men would overlook their wounded pride. She doubted her ability to throw them to safety again. Lord Westonbrook behaved like a first-year student called to explain himself to Matron. "I shouldn't have consented to the release of their swords from the armoury. I only did so because of the reports of local brigands at work nearby." but I never expected the young cockatiels to use their weapons against me. The young cockatiels are the newest members of the fellowship, Matron said. You would do well to remember that. Cecily, confirmation about their membership is not final, Lord Westonbrook replied. Cecily put her hands on her hips. Westy, that's piffle, and you know it. She frowned and waggled a finger at him. Have you forgotten? I was there at your membership confirmation. She waved her other hand at the young nobleman. You already know that their nominations are accepted and ratified. Any other business with the fellowship is but a formality. You should be thankful that they've only drawn their swords. There's no telling what your goddaughter has done to their magic. A different expression appeared on Lord Westonbrook's face. Now he looked more like the headmaster in the portrait in the academy hallway. I'll send them through the assessment examination again. No, you won't, Carillion cried. I'm not an untrained child. Why should I submit to another examination? Nothing has happened to my magic. Phoena's headache intensified. Only Barapa's support kept her on her feet. His chest was hot against her chilled shoulders. Humph! Lord Westonbrook glowered at Carillion. He addressed Cecily. Full of hot air, this one. No need to question which of the domains he represents. Oh-ho! Laughed Oramus. Carillion, he has your measure. And you, Lord Westonbrook said to Oramus, are more smoke and illusion than fire. You haven't distinguished yourself either, but you will have to do. If neither of us impresses you, Carillion said, I dread to think what you make of poor Barapa. This unlikely hero has no magic. He's neither water nor earth. But our scientific rationalist keeps the rest of us grounded. Barapa stiffened behind her. This is all very interesting, but you seem to have forgotten that Our Lady is unwell. Another wave of dizziness threatened Phoena. Her body was too heavy to support itself. She slid towards the ground. Poor Barapa dropped to his knees, unable to hold her. An uncomfortable silence followed his words. Phoena wrestled with this new puzzle. She had become accustomed to everyone reaching for her with their hands. So why were they keeping their distance now? Barapa struggled alone. He grappled with Phoena's leaden weight. Was it her imagination, or did even Lord Westonbrook take a step backwards? What's wrong? Barapa asked, finally managing to scoop her up into his arms. He pulled her towards his chest, every muscle strained with the load as he staggered to his feet. Oramus spoke first. Her powers are still awakening. Why is that a problem? It might not be safe to magic her anywhere. It took her 3 days to find her way back this time, and look at the state of her, Carillion reminded Barapa. If we lose her again while she's this weak, Matron said, she might not survive. Ah, Barapa said, nodding as he looked from face to face. He turned to Oramus. Change into your dragon form. It will only take a few minutes to fly her back to the academy. Oramus scuffed the ground with his boots. It might not be safe to touch her in my magical form either. What? Barapa screamed. All my life I've envied you magic users, and now you're as helpless as me." Words flew from him like lightning in a thunderstorm. "You're more concerned about your own safety than her well-being. I can see how it is. It's up to me again." They backed away. He pushed through the gap towards the road. "I'll carry her then. It's going to take longer without help. Use that time well. Magic yourselves back, but make sure you've thought of some way to help her before we arrive." "I'm staying with you," Carillion said. "So am I," Oramus declared. "Matron can send a coach to meet us. We can't help carry her, but we'll be with you in case anyone accosts you on the road." Dear listening reader, I hope you have enjoyed this latest chapter from the first book in the Phoena's Quest trilogy. This is a beta copy, and the text may change between now and the official publication date. If you have any questions or suggestions that would make this chapter easier to read, please let me know. In return for your help, I will include your name in the acknowledgements as part of the reader team. Chrissy.